Good morning. If I could have your attention and ask the folks in the back to go ahead and be seated. Wow, that was quick. You guys are ready to roll. Thank you. My name is Shiloh Ballard. I am the Executive Director of the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. Thank you for coming to the 8th Annual Silicon Valley Bike Summit. How many of you rode your bike here today? Look at that. Let's give ourselves a round of applause. So like I said, this is the 8th Annual Silicon Valley Bike Summit, but there's another number that is a little more important, I think, and that's the number 25, because this 2018 actually marks the 25th year of the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition being in existence as a nonprofit. How many of you remember what you were doing 25 years ago in 1993? I had just graduated high school, Lindbergh High School, go Vikings. We looked back to see what was going on with the Santa Clara Valley Bicycle Association, as we were named back then. We had just decided to change our name. But we looked back at some of our old in-print newsletters, the Spinning Crank. Folks remember the Spinning Crank? Yep. So back then, California had just passed a law requiring bike helmets for those under 18. Caltrain was grappling with this really controversial issue of whether they should allow bicycles on the trains. So they started experimenting with allowing bikes on trains. And Mountain View's VPAC was, their top priority was making detector loops at many of the city's 50 intersections. So that's what was going on 25 years ago, according to our newsletters. For the Bike Coalition, I look back at the bike movement in general, and back then we were patting ourselves on the back, excited when we would get a skinny white line on the road designated car space and bike space. We were happy about that skinny white line. Fast forward to today, and that's not nearly enough, right? We are advocating for buffered bike lanes, protected bike lanes, physical separation between us and automobiles. In fact, here in San Jose, who's here from San Jose? The city, with support from the Knight Foundation and NACTO, is in the process of putting together a network of protected bike lanes. So this isn't just one really wonderful bike facility. This is a network to make it stress-free and safe feeling for the 60% of us that need a little more encouragement to get out on their bikes. Woo! Yes. Also, what I wanted to mention is, in terms of the role of the Bike Coalition, we play different roles in different cities, right? And each city is in a different place on the evolution towards a bike-friendly community. Some just need folks to show up and wave the pom-poms and say, yay, you're on the right track, you're doing good things. And others are just at the beginning of their thinking. And so there we have a very different task in front of us. And so I wanted to mention that that's the role that the Bike Coalition plays, is we are encouraging folks like you, finding more people like you, mobilizing folks to attend hearings. And in fact, last night at the Cupertino City Council, anyone from Cupertino in the room yet? Yay, and way in the back. You guys stayed up really late, so you're like in the back to make sure nobody sees you falling asleep. But at midnight, the City Council voted to move forward on what had been a very it is and will probably remain to be a controversial trail, the Ragnark Creek Trail, which runs behind, runs behind a bunch of homes. All those homes had signs out in their front yards with a circle and a slash going through the words bike trail. But last night, due to organizations like the Bike Coalition and local organizations, Walk Bike Cupertino, mobilized 50 people to attend that hearing and tell the city council, yes, we want this trail. And so they were successful. So thank you all for being a part of making those kind of projects. So, one thing I wanted to mention, also the evolution of the Bike Coalition. We went from a staff of 1 to a staff of 10, and probably my luck, all the staff is out of the room, but are there some leadership, some Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition staff in the room? And if so, can you stand up and raise your hands? Stand up in the front and raise your hands. We want you all to get to know the staff of the Bike Coalition. So seek them out, ask them questions, ask what we're working on. We want to get to know you and vice versa. So with that, I want to go ahead and get started. First, I want to thank our sponsors. And first of all, the Mineta Transportation Institute for being a host here. They provided this wonderful space. You're going to be hearing from Dr. Karen Philbrick later. She'll be moderating our first panel, but thank you to Mineta Transportation Institute. Also, the e-scooter company Bird, the city of Cupertino, Ford Go Bike, Google, Supervisor Ken Yeager's office, Lyft, and Waymo. And I also wanted to recognize a few of the elected officials who have joined us here today. You heard me mention Supervisor Ken Yeager, Belmont Mayor Doug Kim, Burlingame Mayor Michael Brownrigg, Cupertino Vice Mayor Rod Sinks, Mountain View Council Member Pat Showalter, Burlingame Council Member Emily Beach, San Jose Council Member Don Rocha, and Sunnyvale Council Member Russ Melton. Thank you all for being here. You are helping to advance a pro-bike agenda. So, a quick preview of the day. You have a program that you have received upon registering out at the front table. But we're going to have an opening plenary on new mobility, and after that, we will break out, and you can pick and choose which session you want to go to. We'll reconvene for lunch. Afterwards, we're going to have a short awards ceremony, and then more breakouts, followed by everybody coming back into this room for our final, what we've made a tradition, Pecha Kucha presentation style way to cap off the day. It's super fun. And then a happy hour with booze and snacks. So please stick around and mingle. Let me see what else I need to cover here. Oh, also, I want to remind you, I think on your tables and in your programs, there's all sorts of, every piece of information you need to know about hashtags, so that you can be tweeting and Instagramming and Facebooking all day. So please do that. We want other people to hear about this work and rely on you to get the word out to do that. So with that, I want to go ahead and bring up our panel. So if our panelists can come up to the stage. And I will go ahead and introduce Dr. Karen Philbrick. Karen is the Executive Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute, and she has served in that role at San Jose State University since 2014, and that was after 5 years of service as research director. Karen was also Assistant Director of the National Center for Intermodal Transportation at the University of Denver. She's President of the Executive Committee of the National Council of University Transportation Centers, a board member for Women in Transportation Seminar Foundation, and an advisory board member for the Los Angeles Metro Office of Extraordinary Innovation. That's all kind of all around the country stuff. She's also a Rotary board member, so here in San Jose, so we have her time here as well. So with that, I'm going to bring Karen up on the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all here, and I understand many of you joined us by bicycle, so you must be, your blood is pumping and you're ready for a stimulating conversation. Here at the Mineta Transportation Institute, our mission is to increase mobility for all by improving the safety, efficiency, accessibility, and convenience of our nation's transportation system. We achieve this through surface transportation research, technology transfer, education, and workforce development. Of course, we're based right here at San Jose State University, and our academic home is the College of Business. We are thrilled to be the host for today's exciting conversation, and I'm personally honored to moderate the first session. E-bikes, e-scooters, AV, oh my, new mobility and the future of transportation. I somewhat feel that I should skip across stage as I announce the plenary session title, so if I break into a skip, I hope some will join me later in the morning. As many of you know, the Bay Area is ground zero for new and emerging tech-related transportation options, and our opening plenary panel will discuss how these options are changing the transportation landscape. You'll see with the panelists to my right that we have put together multiple voices. We'll hear from the private sector, the public sector, and from an advocacy firm. We'll begin today's session with each of our speakers presenting from their own unique vantage point a 5 to 7 minute framework of how they're addressing new mobility options. Now, you might see these cards on your table. If you don't, please look for them. Questions will be collected in written format and brought to me in real time here at the stage. So if you have a question, please write it down and hold it up, and staff and volunteers will collect it and bring it to me directly. And I'm sure we will have a wonderful Q&A because this is an exciting and innovative topic that we're addressing this morning. We're going to tackle such questions as, how are all the emerging tech-related transportation options changing the field of transportation? Are the options getting more people out of cars and onto bicycles? Or are they actually competing with transit, biking, and walking trips? How are the systems best regulated, and how can we ensure that it's done equitably, which is critically important? And what are the local and regional goals for transportation, the environment, and equity? And how are these new options contributing to achieving those goals, or not? So we'll look forward to hearing from all of our panelists. In the interest of time, I will briefly give you an introduction, but I invite you to visit the link online for the 2018 speakers list so you can learn more details about each of these experts. Now, while I'll present them in alphabetical order, we're not going to do an assembly line for this particular panel. We're going to mix it up, so we do public, private, have a viewpoint for each of the questions that's asked of our panelists today. But first, as I announce you, please raise your hand so people can put a face with the name. We have Clarissa Kabansagan. She is the New Mobility Policy Director at Transform, a nonprofit transportation advocacy organization based in Oakland. I'm sure many of you have heard of Transform and the fine work that they do. They combine high-quality policy analysis with coalition building, and Clarissa currently leads Transform's efforts to ensure disadvantaged communities benefit from new mobility, including helping steer equity outreach efforts that has allowed Ford Go Bike to lead with the highest low-income ridership in the nation. That's a big deal, and I think that deserves a round of applause. Next, we'll have Callie Sinizal. Excellent. She's the West Coast Transportation Policy Manager for Lyft. Callie works to integrate and improve new mobility options within the city's infrastructure and public transit networks. We also have Jason Islas. Thank you. He's a Public Affairs Associate at Bird. As many of you know, that's the last mile electric vehicle sharing company dedicated to bringing affordable, environmentally friendly transportation solutions to communities across the world. Now, Little Bird told me that Jason has managed to live car-free in Southern California, so we certainly want to hear his perspective this morning. Next, we have Dr. Ria Hudabarat-Lowe. She's the Transportation Manager for the City of Mountain View. Ria specializes in multimodal transportation systems, walkable public spaces, and equitable cities. She's responsible for working with staff and the community on sustainable transportation planning, bicycle pedestrian programs, and transportation policy reform. Ria, thank you for joining us this morning. And finally, we'll hear from Kara Ober, who's an active transportation planner at the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. As many of you know, this is the Bay Area's transportation financing, planning, and coordinating agency for the 100 cities and towns in 9 Bay Area counties, with an annual budget of $2 billion, I might add. She's the program manager for the Forward Go Bike System and the Bike Share Capital Program. Thank you so much, Kara, for making time today. Now, without further ado, let's jump right into the topic. First, we'd like to hear from Ria. Ria, please share your perspective.
So I was trying out a app-enabled e-device this morning on my way in, and as I was driving in, I was thinking about transportation change and transportation revolutions, and how each transportation revolution in the past has involved a number of different factors, 6 different factors. So there's the machine itself, the device, however that works. There's a message that goes with it. So there's, community goals and how the technology aligns with community goals. There's money that finances both the technology and also the infrastructure associated. So the linkages, a connected network that goes with it. There's supportive land uses, and finally there's institutional guidelines or metrics. And so, thinking back about past transportation revolutions, in the 1850s there was a rail revolution. It was based on rail technology. It accompanied a message of industrial development and nation building. It was funded by this new concept of Wall Street railroad securities as well as government subsidies. There was a network of rail infrastructure that was built. There were land use patterns that resulted from a land grant system as well as the emergence of railroads, suburbanization. And in many places, there was institutionalization of standards on things like gauges, on safety, and also on things like competition. If we jump forward another 100 years, in the 1950s, there was a second transportation revolution. In this case, the machine was the car. It was aligned with a message of post-war defense, and supported by massive amounts of money from the federal government for freeway-based suburbanization. And this was institutionalized through self-fulfilling guidelines such as geometric design, travel demand modeling, and traffic impact analysis, as well as parking regulations. So today, in 2018, we're on the cusp of the next transportation revolution. And as this change unfolds, it's going to involve those same 6 factors and the balance between those factors. Today, with today's revolution, there's not just one type of machine. There's the one that I was riding this morning, it was a small e-device. There's a number of different devices, e-bikes, e-scooters, e-boards, e-skates, e-wheels. There are bike-car hybrids that are emerging, and conference bikes that we see in Mountain View. There are new vehicles. There's the autonomous vehicles and the electric vehicles, and also drones. There's new types of transit. There's autonomous transit vehicles and personal rapid transit and automated people movers. There are also new apps. So there's car share, bike share, carpooling apps, as well as transportation network companies. And there are new capabilities such as in big data collection, license plate recognition, parking management, congestion pricing, and automated parking. In the city of Mountain View, we're starting to think about some of these changes in the transportation sector. And our work includes the analysis of automated driveway transit from the station to the North Bayshore area, as well as a pilot program for bike share and some work that we're doing to update our bicycle ordinance to account for the fact that we have more than bicycles these days. All 3 of these initiatives require a level of institutional agility that you don't necessarily have during the evolution phase, but you need during the revolution phase of technology. In terms of our work to update the municipal code, which I can't really say what's in it yet because I don't know, we don't have a draft yet, but I think I got a glimpse of some of those same six factors when we were doing community outreach. And so one of the things that community members really emphasised to us when we went out to the community and held a workshop on the new municipal code was that they wanted us to know the message that the new devices align with the general plan goals of the city in terms of the potential for reducing reliance on single occupant vehicles and making single occupant vehicle trips. And some of our general plan goals include sustainability, affordability, equity, efficiency, and economic vitality. The caveat that community members emphasised was that the use of these devices should not compromise some of the other goals of inclusion in the city of Mountain View. And so really making sure that as we update our municipal code that we consider access for people who are vulnerable road users. So that would include people with disabilities or special needs, seniors, children, and pedestrians. If we consider what this means, what all this change means in terms of some of the other factors, investing money in the development of new bicycle infrastructure links can help to serve multiple devices and users from ages 8 to 80, and this could be important as we shape the next generation of transportation. And so our work on protected bicycle infrastructure and creating a connected network of 8 to 80 facilities is critically important as we move forward with new technologies. And it becomes more compelling as these technologies become more widespread. So in Mountain View, we're working on a number of different corridors at the moment, including Shoreline, California Avenue, El Camino Real, and to name a few in terms of the ones that we're looking at for more protected facilities. Likewise, our work to collaborate with some of our neighbours, so we're working on projects with the City of Sunnyvale, with the City of Los Altos, on bicycle-related infrastructure. This becomes critically important because as we move towards more e-enabled devices, the trips can potentially get longer, and even now they don't stop at the city borders. So part of the process of moving from a car-centric to a multimodal transportation system includes the efforts to align with the goals and the metrics of the city. In Mountain View, and also Palo Alto and San Jose, there are specific numeric goals for reducing single-occupant vehicle trips and increasing the share of trips by other modes of transportation in at least some areas of the city. And so these new metrics help to overcome the institutional inertia that's associated with existing standards within our sector and potentially capturing some of the potential of the new devices. As with any transportation revolution, there is also a land use piece. Building more affordable housing, building more density around transit, and building more mixed use is an important piece of helping to encourage greater use of not just bicycles, but other types of devices as an alternative to drive alone. Conversely, widening roads, more ex-urban and segregated development, and a misalignment of goals and metrics will tend to induce more single-occupant vehicle trips and result in trips that are too long to be taken by either bicycles or other devices. In Mountain View, the Council has endorsed this concept by through their policy of no road widening. There are many outcomes of the emerging transportation technologies and the emerging revolution that we find ourselves within. As citizens and planners who are interested in a sustainable future, it's imperative that we think through all 6 of the elements and work to align institutional metrics with a message of contemporary transportation goals, to prioritise the inclusion of vulnerable users and the development of 8 to 80 infrastructure, to exercise agility in our institutions as we test concepts, to collaborate across borders, and also to address the land use aspect of facilitating more housing, more density, diversity, and more walkable and bikeable urban places.
That was wonderful. Thank you. Shamelessly wrote down institutional agility during the revolution stage of technology. Fabulous. Thank you for that. Next, let's turn to Callie for your perspective, please.
Thank you. My name is Callie Senazal. I work for LIFT in the Transformation Policy team. Prior to this, I have worked in both the public side and the private side of transportation over the past 9 or so years. So I understand a lot of the perspectives and how they intersect here, especially under this umbrella of new mobility. I love how Rita touched on the fact that new mobility has come in waves, and that what we're seeing now is only just as really iceberg of what might be coming down the road in the future. And at Lyft, what we see the future of transportation is multimodal. And by that, I mean that not every ride, that we want to maximize the amount of transportation options there are for all people, and openly recognize that that transportation mode may not always be in a car. And I think that this is most clearly emphasized in our recent ongoing acquisition of Motivate, the largest bike-share company in the country. We're really, really excited about this partnership. Motivate has demonstrated time and time again its impact on first last mile mobility and access in cities across the country, and I'm really looking forward to working with them. As part of this venture into sort of the bike and scooter space, we've identified 4 pillars that are really critical, not only to our bike and scooter, but also our overall commitment to multimodal transportation. The first of which being transportation equity. We, in all of the cities where we are operating, we work close with community partners. Here in San Francisco, we have been working with Transform to really ground a lot of our ventures in community needs and priorities to ensure that any investment we make reflects their priorities and concerns. Second being safer streets, making a significant commitment towards Vision Zero and working closely with organizations like Together for Safer Streets to make sure that the infrastructure that we are supporting and all of our investments are working towards the reduction in collisions and interactions between bikes and vehicles. We're also doing this on our ride-sharing platform and making sure we're advocating for active use of the curb space and better allocation for pickup drop-off zones to avoid conflicts with bicyclists, pedestrians, and other street users. Third being transportation integration. We really see our services across all modes as complementary to public transit. We currently partner with over 25 cities and counties across the country to support their transit services through first last mile access, suburban mobility, paratransit, and also sort of like off-peak servicing people for whom transit is not a viable option in late night or early morning periods. So I think that especially with bikes and scooters, that is a critical aspect of filling gaps in the transportation network and allowing cities and transit agencies to really focus their investments on in the high core, high density areas where they can become that backbone of mobility. The last being environmental sustainability. Our investment in bikes and scooters is as part of our movement towards developing a completely carbon neutral transportation system. You may have heard that Lyft recently announced that all of our rides moving forward are completely carbon neutral. We've invested a significant amount of money in carbon offsets to ensure that all Lyft rides are reducing our impact on the environment. And of course, investing in all electric bicycles and electric scooters are continuing to enhance access and mobility, but while reducing our impact on the environment. And of course, working towards our shared mobility overall, we have a goal of 50% shared rides on our platform by 2020. We're already at 40%, so making huge strides towards making the shift from car ownership to ridership. But I mean, all of this being said, at Lyft, we strongly believe that technology is not a silver bullet. Working with people like those sitting up here with me at the table, on both the public, private, and advocacy sides, they're critical to advancing the types of change that we need to see in the transportation landscape. So partnering around investment in critical infrastructure, land use, street design, and also working together in larger mode shift goals that are not really going to just be advanced from one side. We really see this as a collaborative partnership, and I'm looking forward to talking more with my fellow panelists about this.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate you really highlighting the need for collaboration as we work through some of these congestion issues and develop more of a successful approach of multimodal emphasis on transportation. So thank you. Let's turn now to Clarissa, please, from Transform.
Hi, I'm very excited. works at this nexus of both climate and equity. For 20 years in the Bay Area and throughout the state of California, we fought for more funding for biking, walking, and transit. And my lens here really is the inequities that exist between the haves and the have-nots. We know that our existing transportation system before new mobility came on the scene was already vastly inequitable. So people of color, low-income people, people with disabilities, and seniors often have poor access to clean transportation options and suffer the worst impacts of climate pollution. And so Transform has, over the years, watchdog agencies like MTC has spent a number of years really looking at agency budgets and trying to figure out how do I get more funding, because some of my good coalition partners have given our coalitions towards the things that are more active transportation and transit-oriented, including land use. And so, as that advocate, I've seen funding over time just dwindling to the point where cities and counties and our state are just trying to help ourselves. We're raising our own funding through sales tax measures, which are progressive, and through ballot measures, for example. Enter the private sector through Uber, Lyft, bike share, now scooter share. I see the private sector capitalizing on the gaps in our transportation system, often because we've built our system, our cities, around this assumption that everyone can own and operate a vehicle, and parking is free everywhere, and we should drive to every single destination. That's most of the Bay Area. Unless you live in maybe San Francisco or the East Bay, you're probably in a vehicle at some point of your week. And so Transform is more concerned than ever about this ever-widening gap. We understand that we have a housing crisis. A lot of people are like, where am I going to live if my rent goes up? But no one ever really thinks about where they're living based on the cost of transportation. Unless you're a low-income person or a person dependent on transit or bike or walk, you're not thinking about your housing location as it relates to the cost of transportation or whether or not there's transportation for you to get to work, go to work. And so we over the course of the past couple of years have been partnering with our allies and our agencies to figure out what is the role of government, what is the role of community-based organizations in pushing companies that almost always go to the more affluent parts of town and are geared towards people who don't have many barriers to access. It assumes that you need a smartphone, that you have a credit card oftentimes, and there have been places where companies have overcome these barriers, but even still there are access to new mobility options for some of the most vulnerable communities. And so as advocates for enabling the opportunity for especially vulnerable populations, we see new mobility as a very interesting opportunity. Obviously, it's driven by the private sector. So, where is this? In the public-private partnership, who is responsible for ensuring equity happens with new mobility? Is that government? Is that community groups standing together and pushing for more? I think it's going to be a little bit of both, and it's going to mean, as I mentioned, really extending that olive branch to private companies and figuring out what a partnership looks like. So we're geared towards thinking through equity pilots with the government as well as these companies, because we know it's going to take that to actually make a shift in who can readily access mobility. And something I started to say recently is it's fascinating to see suburbs, for example, get bike share or scooter share, and that's an investment that we shouldn't take lightly. So a lot of cities have struggled to build biking infrastructure or even keep transit going. And so when we see immense investment in biking and scootering, as an active transportation person, I kind of wonder, well, then where's this inflection point in the way that our cities design our streets to account for people who for maybe decades haven't been on a bike or on a scooter, and how do we create safer places for these vehicles to operate so that more and more people can opt out of the car. And so the thing that I've been saying is $5 million in the suburbs through transit might not get you much. The $5 million through scooters and bikes might get you a little bit more in terms of how we do the shift. That's the opportunity I think that we have as advocates to really press on government to leverage this opportunity, especially as public resources are just on the decline.
Excellent, thank you very much. I appreciate you discussing the barriers to access. Let's hear now from Jason, Public Affairs with Ballard. And we need to know how you manage car-free in Southern California. So this is cool.
It's not as hard as everyone thinks it is, to be honest. It depends on where you live. I like to say that I live car-free because initially because of poverty, and then habits, and now it's principle. So no, living car-free in Southern California, it certainly presents its own challenges, but I think Southern California is actually a place where we're seeing tremendous investment in public transportation, and the Southern California of my childhood, the landscape is very different from an active and public transportation world. So I was right in the long run at the time when I argued with my parents about not needing a car in Southern California. So that means a little bit about my background. I'm at Public Affairs with Ballard. I also am part of their advocacy team, and I come out of the shared Safe Streets advocacy world. I used to write for a streets blog. See my colleague in there, my former colleague. And a big advocate for shared and safe streets. I also used to do a lot around housing activism and advocacy for our city's affordable. And I want to echo a point that I made earlier. So when Ballard first came on the streets, it started in Santa Monica, which is where I live. And I was a bit skeptical, because I consider myself a bit of a techno-skeptic. Technology is not a silver bullet for addressing a lot of these issues. A lot of these issues are very human issues, and they're very human problems that transcend time and technological development. And oftentimes, depending on how that technology is implemented, it can recapitulate a lot of problems that are in society, those widening gaps, etc. So I don't just jump at the first technological innovation that comes along. But what I did notice over time with Ballard was that a lot of people were writing them. A lot of people were actually writing them. More people than I would see in Santa Monica writing bicycles as well. So they were adding people to the streets in a more human scale way. And frankly, it was happening quickly. And I was genuinely impressed to see this, what was essentially mode shift happening fast-paced in front of me. That's what we've been pushing for as activists for a long time, is to get people to consider engaging in the streets at a human scale. So I decided to take a ride. I enjoyed it. I saw, okay, I can get behind this. Ended up going to work for the company, and now as part of the political advocacy team and the public affairs team, working closely with governments to try to iron out some of the rough patches of mode shift, because mode shift, especially when it happens quickly, can be have some rough edges. And but that being said, one other thing that we do at Ballard that I think has the potential to be transformative is we are creating, I think, a constituency for better State Streets infrastructure. In Santa Monica, for example, we activated our user base because the city of Santa Monica was considering its first ever protected bike lane along 17th Street. Anyone knows the geography of Santa Monica, it connects the north side of the city, the Metro Expo line on 17th Street, and the City College, Santa Monica College. The city had been planning a protected bike lane there for a long time, and we reached out to our riders, let them know this was happening, and made sure the city council and the planning commission got tremendous support for this project. And the reality is, I think people who may not have considered getting around the city in a way other than car for a long time are trying this out, even if at first it's a novelty, and becomes something that you get used to, and you start experiencing the street for the first time, positively for the first time in a while, as not a driver, right? And I think that's the real potential here. Is a lot of this, I dare say, movement that's happening is really affecting the conversation in the mainstream, how we talk about how we allocate our street space, right? Obviously, it's not uncontroversial, right? People are talking about street parking, people riding on sidewalks, etc. But at the root of that conversation is how we divide up the public space that is our streets. We're arguing over about 10% of the streetscape. 90% of that streetscape is going to cars. And that's a massively inefficient way of moving people. Even you take out the emissions factor with increasing electrification of car vehicles, the geometry of the car really doesn't, it's anathema to livability in cities. It's a non-human scale form of transportation. And shifting people out of thinking, well, the first thing I need to do is get in a car when you've got to take that trip to the grocery store or take that trip to the train station, is fundamental in reshaping our cities and the public space that is our streets for the next century. And I frankly believe that Bird is a small part of that, of changing that conversation in a meaningful way, introducing that conversation to the mainstream in a way I haven't seen in my lifetime. And as someone who's never owned a car, really happy that people are talking about it. Happy to talk about the cities about widening sidewalks and increasing protected bike lanes and getting rid of on-street parking if it means replacing it with a shared shared use parking. Fit 10 to 15 of these devices in a single on-street car parking spot. And I think that's a much more human scale way of going about designing your cities. I like to say transportation networks are ecosystems, and as ecosystems they fail as monocultures. For the past 60, 50 years, our transportation networks have been largely monocultures. But just like ecosystems, the more diversified our transportation networks are, the healthier they are. The more options people have, the more choices they get to make, rather than forced to make a binary or even a unilateral decision given the market. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Last but not least, Kara from MTC, please share your perspective.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. As Kara mentioned, I'm Kara. I work in active transportation at NTC. I want to start by thanking Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition for putting on this event and this panel. Also, NTC works with and Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition on Excellent Day. So I want to say thank you to Emma and to Shiloh particularly, again, for hosting this. So I have two quick questions for the audience. Before Karen mentioned NTC, who's heard of it? Oh, that was 8 plus. Okay. I don't need to give the overview. You all understand it. But planning for just under 8 And then the second question is, how many people have taken a bike share trip in the Bay Area? Okay, so more people on my MTC than a bike share, but half. I work on active transportation planning and big picture in terms of regional thinking and goals and targets around active transportation. Ultimately, we're working to get more people, as many people mentioned on the panel, out of cars, and particularly using their own 2 feet and using 2 wheels on a bicycle to get around, so road shift. And then making sure that's done in an affordable and accessible and safe way, so that people feel safe to make the decisions to walk and bike to where they need to go. And ultimately, we're using this as a key strategy to reduce, our carbon emissions, also have better air quality, and increase physical fitness, so in terms of, public health. So the majority of my work is on bike share, and provide a little bit of perspective and a couple talking points. And I do have a map. Oh, great. Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to take us back to January 2017. Not that long ago, and Shiloh asked us to bring us back 25 years. We're only talking about the past 17 months in the Bay Area. A lot has changed. Everyone here has mentioned a lot has changed. So I just want to kind of paint the picture, start big, regional, and then kind of zoom in a little bit more on bike share. So this is a map in January 2017 of the cities that had bike share and the cities that we knew were planning bike share at this time. So one example is in San Jose, Bay Area bike share, the blue bikes, the light blue bikes are still operating in San Jose. And MTC, we were working with Motivate as well as the 5 cities, including San Jose, to plan for Go Bike. That was common, we were planning for that in July. So you'll see that on the map. Along the peninsula, we were with bike share in San Mateo, and then a couple other spots in the region, and they were really focused on business parks. So fast forward to today, 17 months later, we have 28 cities have bike share. 28 cities. So as far north as Healdsburg, as far south as Gilroy, which concludes the Caltrain corridor. So my goal with this slide is to kind of give us a really good picture about where the industry has gone and the extreme growth. So you see the extreme growth, 28 cities, industry. We've had companies coming up. So at this time, in January of 2017, Go started coming to market. Most people had never doing that even then. They've since come and gone, and they're out of business. We've had OFO come in from China to operate bikes in Silicon Valley, and they've since said, you know what, the North American operations, classic bikes, we can't do it, and they've packed up and they've gone to back to China. And then bigger picture, in terms of just thinking bigger picture besides bike share, we have Uber buying Jump, they're in the bike share game, and then we have Lyft who's acquiring Roadgate. So kind of big picture, what we're thinking about, what's happening with bike share and new mobility, kind of talking big picture about where we've been. So 2 other quick things I want to mention, just specifically with MTC and bike share, we again are working on Go Bike. So you'll see in the Portland Bay Area, there's 4 cities that have Go Bike as well as San Jose. So growing bike share to 7,000 bikes, ideally much more, bringing on e-bikes. We've got dockless bikes in North San Jose, and really looking at that as a partnership, public-private partnership, where there's equal stake in the game. So I was mentioned earlier, repurposing our public space for more efficient modes. So working with having the cities work to repurpose and put a station to repurpose the curb to make it more efficient and to provide more trips and easier access for people. And then lastly, one quick thing, just really specific, but kind of framing bike share in the region and MTC's role and what we're working on. We're also working to fund bike share. We still see public funding as really important in this space. If it works, if it helps to meet regional and local goals, we should be putting public funding towards it. And then also working with companies that are able to provide it for free. But what is that partnership? What is that public-private partnership? So we're working with Fremont, we're working with Richmond, and also companies that are in Sonoma along the Smart Corridor to fund bike share again. And again, to think about on-bikes and to use transportation by foot and back to wheels. So I'll conclude with that, but I just wanted to say thanks again for having this conversation. I think it's really timely and important. So, thank you.
Very much appreciated. It's very helpful to have a visual perspective. Now, just as suspected, I have 32 questions and about 42 minutes to go, so let's jump right in. And panelists, would you be willing to stand up here a few minutes after we conclude if people from the audience have questions that weren't asked and answered? Great, thank you. Okay, let's go first with Jason. How is Byrd reacting to cities like Santa Monica that are banning scooters?
Well, Santa Monica's not banning scooters. No, actually, Santa Monica is an interesting case study. It's like, you know, all cities are different, right? We're all unique, and they all have different challenges. And, you know, for example, San Jose, we've been in conversation with the city here, and you know, to address the particular concerns around San Jose. But you know, San Jose has been very open and interested in a practical approach to how to plug the new modes into their existing transportation network. Santa Monica, my hometown, we've been working closely with the city. It has been has had its ups and downs in its in our relationship, but I feel like as a company, Byrd has certainly learned and evolved from those interactions and those engagements. And you know, it's good to remember that this Byrd, which was the first company introducing this dockless shared use e-scooter, hasn't been on the road for a year yet. We started in September and in Santa Monica, and so given how quickly this has moved, I think progress has been astounding. We've we've worked with cities to get a better sense of what their concerns are, how to address them. We are working with Santa Monica to talk about, and other cities where we're at, looking at dedicated shared device parking. So dedicating spots on it, but still maintaining the important part of it is that they're ubiquitous. You know, right now, the only real vehicle that's ubiquitous in our shared streets are cars. So we're working with them to address the concerns around people and driver behavior. And I think that most cities, the vast majority of cities, understand that there's a great opportunity here. And it's an opportunity to get in cars, especially for short trips. Our average ride per vehicle in almost every city is between 1.5 to 2 miles. It's that space that's usually too far to walk for most people, but too far to really justify driving. And I think that, you know, as these conversations develop along the road places, I think that the more we'll learn, and I think the more cities will learn how to regulate these new innovations in a way that allows for mode shift to happen, but without making it problematic for other members.
Excellent, thank you. Kelly, you look like you have to offer.
Yeah, I wanted to just chime in when we're talking about Santa Monica. I think this is extremely excited about what's happening in Santa Monica. As part of their process there, they're one of the first cities to put out and sort of formalize a scooter and bike share permit process. Lyft did participate in that, and I've been working together with a lot of local organizations, one of them Investing in Place, I think, who work specifically around questions of equity and access, especially for people who are traditionally kind of left out of the transportation game. I think working closely with our community partners is what made our applications so strong, and this was actually ranked #1 on both the bike share and the scooter share permits. So we are currently waiting for a city council decision whether to whom they'll be awarding the permits. I think they're choosing the top 2 ranked on both sides, but I think working closely with our community partners is something that has really made our application strong, and I'm hoping that'll be something that we'll be able to bring to some standpoint soon.
Thank you, and there's that collaboration piece that's so critical to moving ahead. Clarissa, let's turn to you. I've got a couple of questions that technically ask about the same thing. It's about equity, and how do we address residents without a smartphone or phones without data or internet access, or potentially even credit cards?
Those are all very different barriers. I think there are good models for Go Bike. I can speak to that system because we work pretty directly with the company. There are ways that companies can set up cash payment locations. I know that Lyft and Uber probably figured out what to do with someone who doesn't have a credit card as a for example present in the past. I think our big challenge has been when we've gone into the community, at least in Oakland, where we surveyed folks, the big two barriers people have mentioned are credit card access and the cost. And so for us, based on what we've heard from our community members, it's really the cost that seems prohibitive in terms of people's access. So a lot of what we do as advocates is think through with government or with the company, what is a way to reduce the cost for low-income use of a system. And so something that's really interesting is as cities like Oakland or San Francisco are thinking about scooters, a lot of people are looking to the Ford Go Bike $5 for the first year low-income membership, and then that $5 becomes $5 a month in years 2 and beyond. And I see a lot of times in the permits for scooters that they want an equivalent type of program, and I honestly don't know. When people ask me, like, what's a good low-income price point for scooters, I don't know. And we don't have enough data, I think, to understand what it would take to get over that barrier. We have something of a model for Go Bike, but over time, are we going to see consistent use by low income? Not sure. So for us as advocates, I think it's continuing to look at the numbers of who's using the system and figuring out what the barriers are to actual use. And honestly, I did mention smartphones earlier. I feel like most of the systems have figured out a way to use just regular messaging to access. But our phone use in disadvantaged communities, I feel like there's not as much of a gap as people probably assume that to be. I think there's more of a gap when it comes to internet access. So what we've seen helpful to overcome the barrier is on for Go Bike, Motivate gave us the ability to sign people up using a Google form. And so we have the technology, and even if people didn't have the ability to upload their SNAP food card, we could, as ambassadors, look at the card and not have to upload it. And so there are ways that kind of in-person sign-up can help reduce some of the barriers.
Next, we have a question. I'm concerned about safety for bikes and peds when we have autonomous cars. I don't see this being addressed much at all in planning or policy. What can be done to ensure safety? Maria, would you like to take a stab at that?
So I didn't really talk about autonomous vehicles because most of that is covered in the California Vehicle Code and not at the local level. So that's my big caveat for that. I think in terms of a policy question, we do have some concerns also about AVs and other types of vehicles that they might not be actually achieving our goals in terms of reducing single vehicle trips. So it could be an AV and it could result in 2 trips rather than one going into a place. So it's not just an issue of the vehicles themselves, but it's also an issue of how many trips they end up making and the exposure of people to those additional trips as well.
And actually, I have a second question for you. What's the status of Waymo's pilot work in Mountain View? It's in the works. Answer from the floor. It's in the works. Whoever submitted this question, maybe follow up with the gentleman over here. Thank you. Let's see. Let's turn now to Kara. Kara, how should the public sector regulate new transportation technology without stifling innovation?
Yeah, great question. I think one important way to view new mobility is to apply the
baseline regulation to all your mobility options. So for example, the TNC company that is providing a vehicle to provide one person to do 1 mile, a 1 mile trip, should have similar regulation to the bike share company that is providing the same 1 mile trip for access for a bike. So if one company is required to share open data, to have multilingual translation in one pass, for example, then all of your private mobility companies that are operating in your region or your county or your town should have the same baseline. And you can decide what those baseline regulations are. To Ria's point, there's some complexities with how things are regulated at a state and county and local level, but we should definitely be thinking about baseline regulations to start, and then adjusting your carrot and stick approach based on how well a company or a mode is helping reach your goals. So if BMT is the top 3 most important goals for your DOT, for example, if you're a public agency, then if a certain mode is helping reduce BMT, give them dedicated curb space. As Jason said, how do we think about helping the modes that move people most efficiently, safe, affordable, are helping us meet our goals? We can have quote-unquote free transportation systems provided to cities and towns, and then as the public sector, we can regulate the public right-of-way, and how do we work together with public-private partnerships to repurpose and repair.
Fantastic, thank you. I think there's a response. Okay, Callie and/or Jason. Electric vehicles are only as green as the grid that feeds them. Are Lyft or Bird working in the area supporting or pushing for large-scale switch to renewable sources of energy in the U.S.?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, Lyft recently committed that all Lyft rides moving forward would be carbon neutral, and that's through a partnership with through an investment in carbon offsets. But of course, I mean, offsets are only really one way to counteract the impact we're having on our environment. So that comes in part of moving towards shared vehicles, increasing vehicle occupancy, and then of course encouraging people to switch modes from driving and parking to walking, biking, taking transit, carpooling, all other sorts of modes. So that's one way in which we're dealing with the issue of is through our vehicle fleet. So we work closely with several rental car companies, including Hertz, something we call our Express Drive program. So for people who don't currently own a car or don't want to own a car but do want to drive for Lyft, they can join our Express Drive program and have access to a car. So we're working closely with them, with rental car companies, to increase access to electric vehicles. A lot of people see electric vehicles as something that is it's either too expensive, too costly, and also perhaps maybe too complicated for them to own on their own. But if they're able to access it through our Express Drive program, we need help with maintenance, we need help with insurance costs, things like that. So really increasing acceptance and raising awareness of electric vehicles. And then on the other side, working closely with charging infrastructure companies to advance the expansion of infrastructure, because there is still a lot of charge anxiety. People with electric vehicles are worried about driving for long distances, but as technology evolves, we're seeing rapid increases in battery charging power, in the affordability of vehicles, but really if there isn't a charger at their destination, people won't feel comfortable using that technology. So that's something that we're working closely, a lot of at the statewide, we're working closely at the statewide level up in Sacramento to push for more investment in EV.
And I mean, absolutely, yeah, we are also exploring carbon offset, which is part of the issue. But I also, I think I don't think the car is the best use case for the battery. And when it comes down to it, when we talk about the percentage of energy that's required to transport the passenger or the person relative to the amount of energy that's required to transport the vehicle, the best use case for these are smaller vehicles like e-bikes, like scooters. And the reality is the vast majority of the urban the problems our cities face with regards to cars, the emissions are definitely part of it, but it's still moving large pieces of metal through crowded urban spaces. It takes a tremendous amount of urban real estate through parking. through street space. None of those are really addressed through addressed through whether or not the car is electric or. And the reality is that as we motion and cars, whether they're electric or combustible, we will necessarily reduce our dependence on dirty energy by virtue of the fact that we will be using much more energy efficient transportation. That doesn't mean we should actively pushing at the federal and state levels. California is leading the country right now, and hopefully the federal government will also get back into the business of working towards clean energy sometime in the very near future, because this is an existential crisis, and it's absolutely at the front of companies like Bird's thoughts about making sure that the electric grid is a sustainable one.
Thank you. I have a question now I'm going to pose to all the panelists. Please keep your responses to 30 seconds or less. Can you speak to e-bikes, e-scooters, etc. in the suburban context where unique features like population density, having children, etc. change the visibility of these services?
Okay, 30 seconds. E-bikes are great no matter where you are, how dense your community is. I think especially for communities where your distance might be longer, that e-bike provides that utility, especially if you're carrying kids or groceries, etc. It's helping give that boost. So I think it applies to urban, suburban, and rural communities.
So I think that actually in suburban areas, they're very suited to e-bikes because you have slightly longer distances than in other areas. So, having a little bit of a lead boost is helpful for getting those distances. Also, with the dockless bikes, it's difficult to provide enough dots to make the system work in a suburban area. So having a dockless e-bike system in a suburban area, I think is actually really helpful. The issue that we've come across in Mountain View is the issue of parking and people objecting to having parking in their neighbourhood. And so I think this is something that we need to work with the community to figure out what's the solution. People are used to seeing dockless cars parked in their neighbourhood. But they're not used to seeing dockless bikes. And so it's a part of it might maybe an adjustment, a part of it maybe also you need to, we have 70 to 100 years of regulations on where you can park the dockless cars. So we might need to kind of introduce some of those ideas for the bikes as well.
I think money put press on the children issue. Maybe we need different kinds of e-bikes, like e-cargo bikes, to help people actually get to the grocery store on a e-bike share model, or something with an extra cycle on the back. That's my.
You can chat.
That can be urban for as well.
And that really speaks also to the point that Rita made earlier in our opening framework about having bicycle connectivity that allows a user 8 to 80 to move freely and feel safe. Kelly.
Yeah, definitely seconding everything that everyone has said before me. I see dockless scooters, bikes, and all the other mobility options as a great benefit in suburban areas and really reducing the barriers to access. The easier we can make it for people to use other modes that are not their personal vehicles will really be critical to advancing motion. And also, Clarissa hits on a great point in diversifying the types of bikes and scooters. We're doing a lot of work looking at adaptive bicycles as well, so that we can make it easier for people with disabilities and mobility issues to use bikes. And the same on the scooter side, wanting to reduce that barrier, make it safe for people of all levels of ability and comfort to use these services.
Yeah, I mean, I reread what I said earlier on. Transportation networks are ecosystems, and no one mode is going to solve all the problems for everybody. And that means we need to encourage diversity of transportation options everywhere. The suburbs are a unique problem, and they were deliberately built for cars and with massive federal subsidies to that point. And that means it's going to take some time, but when people have other options, minds to the idea that the streets can be used in other ways besides driving. So let there be options.
Let there be options, well stated. This next question, please jump in if you have a response. Are there surveys that show people using scooters and bike share are leaving cars behind? Or are they simply replacing walking trips?
Sure, I can take that. So we know that people are getting out of the cars and getting on bike share. A couple years ago, Susan Jean did a study in a bunch of North American cities and found that 25 to 50% of respondents said that they're driving cars and they're taking that bike share trip. I will note that mode share happens at different, across all modes for bike share. So the same study found that in dense environments, people can actually replace their whole trip and use a bike from point A to point B. And then in more suburban, less dense areas, people are actually getting out of their cars, using a bike, and then going to rail. And we were before, because that catchment area is larger, and they're also walking more in certain communities where they have access to that bike. And then more recently, more locally, Fargo did a member survey in November. It wasn't a huge sample size, but over 50% of people said that their last trip was paired with transit. And for those that did not pair their last trip with transit, 25% said that they would have made that trip if Fargo didn't exist by car. Personal vehicle as well as a TNC. So, and just a big picture and then local examples as well.
Jason, do you have perspective to offer?
Yeah, we're currently in the process of reaching out to our ridership to better understand what their habits are and why they've taken trips. But I think the biggest indicator to me is that across every city, so the bird is now in about 30 cities, and across every city, our average ride is about 1.5 to 2 miles. I'm one of those crazy people who will walk 1.5 miles when I have the time, but I think that 1.5 to 2 miles is usually a bit long for most people to walk. And we're working, as I said, to put a bit more of a scientific approach to understanding that. I do think there's probably a degree of induced trips. These people who thought about getting down the main street, but before Bird, they would have stayed in. Part of the reason why the restaurants down there like us so much, because people go down there without worrying about parking or getting stuck in traffic. But yeah, I mean, I am confident that we are absolutely giving people the alternative to driving or calling a ride.
Sure, so speaking to that first and last mile solution, we know from the scientific literature that the standard for the past 20 years is that people won't typically walk more than 1/4 to a half mile to reach a destination. So another solution is the multimodal approach. Let's take ourselves out of the suburban and the urban area and think about recreational trails now with this next question. How can we avoid conflicts between quiet, fast e-bikes and traditional cyclists on recreational trails? Open to the floor.
Happy to take first stab. So I think when we talk about electric vehicles, whether it's scooter, bike, board, whatever the next thing is, and we also think about mobile users that use packs. So we're getting people the 8 to 8 years using a pack because they want to be separated. I think thinking about speed and the weight of the vehicle is an interesting way to think about it. Instead of, electric is bad, good, it's let's think about it in terms of speed. And to Jason's point, the automobile, whether it's driverless or not, is still a large and heavy item that if it hits you, it's going to hurt whether it has a driver or it doesn't. So thinking about the weight, I think, and the speed is a really good perspective when bringing that conversation together of regulation on tax. And I think we're talking about it a lot in all the different counties and towns.
To jump in on that, I was recently in Denver working with them on their upcoming Douglas bike and scooter permit. We just recently received one of those permits to operate, so we're looking forward to launching our scooter fleet there in the fall. And one of the things we were doing was walking around, talking with officials, looking at their infrastructure, and they have approached their bicycling infrastructure downtown very strategically in signage and wayfinding, actually separating out bicycling and walking in certain areas. And so I could see working with signage, wayfinding to educate users, dedicate circumference of way areas. But I think overall, we should be making all facilities accessible to all users. And so that means not just dedicating 3 feet of like space and a painted white line on a road to, and assuming that everyone is going to be able to fit into it, making sure that you have, that there's protection, that there's enough right of way that people can go around, they can pull over to the side if they need to take a break, that there's enough room for everyone and all levels of comfort.
You touched on an education piece, which I think is important. Here's a comment from the floor. I was just in Santa Monica last week with my 72-year-old mom. There were e-scooters littered for his mom's verbiage all over the city. How do you introduce these new technologies without alienating the masses and making people fear change? And adding my own views, where's the educational component in public outreach in this question?
So, probably Santa Monica more than any other place for a tremendous amount of resources to outreach. I think this is symptomatic of what it takes to do promotion. And I also think it's, so rider behavior is one of the major issues that we're facing in every market, and it's working with cities. The city of Santa Monica recently, we worked with the city of Santa Monica to sign towards a comprehensive public service outreach program that will include signage on signage on buses. There we go. In-app outreach. We have people on the ground addressing user behavior, and I think user behavior is an interesting problem to have because I think it's a good problem to have. In that, I think it's representative of motion. These are people who are experiencing the street as cyclists for the first time, many of them, or for the first time in a long time, essentially as cyclists, and they're not yet quite acquainted with the etiquette there. And it's a great opportunity to reach out to these folks, to engage them and remind them how to share the streets in this new way. I think that it overall makes people more conscientious over time. I think Santa Monica right now is at the height of its tourist season, so that's an added element. There's a lot of people visiting out of town who haven't seen Bird or other shared use electric scooters at the moment, so we redoubled our efforts there. Again, in-app messaging, people on the ground. We're going to have the boards even pushing people to be safer. We're doing Facebook ads, really pulling out all the stops just to educate people. Again, we've been around for less than a year, and I think that as time moves on and we continue to work with cities hand in hand to aggressively educate people, we will see a lot of the rougher edges get smoothed out over time.
I can add something on the regular hours line. So in Mountain View, we have a number of areas. One of them is along Castro Street, where there are designated parking places for the new bike share bikes. I think that looking at other places, however, for example, looking at Singapore, the model is that you can't park any of the bike share bikes in there, but in a corral that's painted on the ground. And so I think it's possible that we may see things headed towards. I feel like they're a little further along in the trajectory of this technology than perhaps we are. And so that is something that may, occur over time. I think we're still trying to figure out. The big issue that we've noticed is not so much the behavior on the street, but the behavior with parking. And so it is something I think that will be, sorted out over time in terms of regulations.
And one quick thing that to add to that, I know I said earlier that technology is not a silver bullet, but I think on this case, when it comes to fleet management, technology is something that absolutely we want to leverage. And I think part of our plan for when for bringing bikes and scooters to Santa Monica will be using our app and our platform to understand where our vehicles are, where our devices are at all times, and making sure that whatever communication in terms of restricting where they can go, where they can operate, where they can be undocked, is something that we can help influence within the platform, and working closely with the city to understand what are the areas that you do want bicycles, you do want dockless bicycles, you don't want scooters, and then also, of course, dedicating the resources that we have to enforcement. And making sure that you have readily available our local operations team who are able to go out, move devices, move vehicles out of the way, making sure that they're avoiding conflicts, and of course,
have 9 precious minutes, so let's find an alternative here. Yes or no response, are e-scooters active transportation?
No.
Rita?
It was quite active for me this morning. It was more exhausting than walking because I didn't realize at first that it was supposed to be. In general, though.
Not quite, unless the battery is dead.
Yes.
Yes and no. Yes and no. I use it sometimes as an e-assist device when I'm going up hills and things like that, but probably less active than, say, like
If the future looks like on-demand, self-driving cars, e-scooters, bikes, and public transit, what should our street design look like? This is a great question. Wow, we have multiple people who want to respond. In the interest of time, this is for response three.
I think the street design needs to reflect how we want to people moving around, and this is the role of the public sector here, especially how we actually want people getting around. The combustion engine has given us an existential crisis, and that should be reflected in how we design our streets. It shouldn't be 10% for all other modes and 90% for cars, whether or not these are autonomous vehicles. We need to see a lot less to cars.
At that point. At that point, I'd say streets need to be designed for active uses, not personal vehicle storage. That is the,
Yeah. I have goosebumps. That was a good one.
to that point, that means putting people making sure that people can access the curb easily and safely by every mode possible, and whether that's biking, walking, transit, or ride sharing. That is what we should be seeing on our streets. So high capacity, high frequency transit at the core, supplemented by biking, walking, and ride sharing.
Yeah, I just want to echo that maybe we can finally repurpose parking beyond just the on-street parking, but parking lots can be turned into housing, and I think our highways can be also efficient. My colleague Chris Lefebvre saw him earlier, but we're really pushing for better uses of the highway. So can we get protected bikeways instead of highways that efficiently move cars? So we can kind of work on that sooner rather than even waiting for the 80s.
I think that there's a need as we think about street design to work from the outside in rather than the other way around. So traditionally, we've thought about street design in terms of moving the vehicles and then everything else gets squeezed to the side. But as we move towards this more on-demand and all of the rest of the technology, we're starting to think from the outside of the street. So the sidewalk needs to be protected for ADA access and for pedestrians and people with different types of needs, and then moving towards the centre line from there. So providing space for different types of devices and bicycles, and then if they end up having to mix with vehicles, it needs to be slowed down as we go to the centre.
Yeah, I echo what everyone said, prioritizing biking, walking, and transit, and embracing carbon streets around downtown urban cores.
Absolutely, and to that end, and this goes into a little bit of legislation, there's a question related to Senate Bill 1 funds and the fact that currently there are 112 projects underway and happening in our region related to bicycle and pedestrian safety. How is Senate Bill 1 impacting the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so Senate Bill 1, I'm working on a bike pickup program. It's being funded by SB1. On the note of SB1, I want to bring up Prop 6 because we are actively funding and working on projects, but on the November ballot, there is Proposition 6 that would repeal SB1. And regarding the importance of budgets and active transportation and safe streets, there is $100 million specifically allocated for active transportation that would be repurposed and we do not have access to. MTC and ADAC have actually printed out some information sharing documents that I don't think are on the table yet, but happy to share later. And then bigger picture in terms of complete streets, $1.5 million a funding here for the next 10 years is up for grabs. If Prop 6 passes, we will not have that funding. So just information sharing in terms of what to think about in November.
You know, thank you for that perspective, Kara. I see we have a follow-up question.
Just want to point out that
Okay.
the flyer is out on the registration table.
Okay, it's on the registration page.
Now, of course, many of us up here cannot lobby and we cannot advocate, but we certainly can educate. And as many of you know, Senate Bill 1 is in jeopardy, and if repealed in the ballot in November, 6,500 safety-critical projects that are currently happening in the state of California will cease, and there is no backup funding. This is not a partisan issue, this is a safety issue. Thank you for your comments. Let's turn now to compliance. Please comment on an aspect missing in the revolution that you discussed, Rhea. Excuse me, I'm switching gears here to a question about the revolution. Health improvements in chronic conditions for active human transportation. When we talk about e-scooters and active modes of transportation, what are the impacts for the person's health, or do you see any impact?
I think that all of the small devices, including the ones that are more active and the ones that are less active, they help to connect people and bring the community together. There are various aspects of health. Part of it is obesity. Some of the leading causes of death are obesity related, and so things that are more active, like walking and biking, are very important in terms of those modes. But I think anything that will allow people to get out. Another important health crisis is related to mental health and depression. And the way that we've designed our streets and our cities tends to separate and isolate people and force them to rely on private motor vehicles for their transportation. So there's a lack of ambient interaction that they have, and all of these different types of devices, the more active ones and the less active ones, can help to connect communities more and address all of those different types of health issues.
Jason.
Well, and to that point, I think we need to, it's not going to be one or the other, right? I go to this anecdote the other day. I took a scooter to the grocery store because it was locally doing. I bought more than I thought I was going to buy, and so I got a bike with a basket on it to help me at home. And so again, these aren't. It's not one is not going to replace the other. We're not going to replace all active transportation with e-scooters and so on and so forth. These are designed to complement each other in a meaningful way and get people out of cars. If I had driven to the grocery store in a car, I would have also left the grocery store with the car. I wouldn't have had to make a choice based on what my need was at that moment. And the car really does just kind of suck all the choices away because it's carrying around with you. You don't have the option to just leave it there when you're done with it.
Okay. Last question, 30-second response from each of our panelists, please. What is causing fear and backlash around new mobility solutions, and how do we overcome it? That's a good question. Very thought-provoking question.
My initial response thinking is that the fact that we have such a car culture for the past 100 years is one of the main reasons we have such a fear. It's changing, it's new, it's different. There's a lot of documents flying around. What we think in a non-cultural way, typically, not this room, but typically, we're in a bubble right now. I think it's hard, the work is hard, and it's because of the car culture that we have in it.
Yeah, I would add to that. So I think change is always can be difficult for people. There are some legitimate concerns in terms of potential conflicts between the devices and pedestrians. I think that's something that we need to address as we kind of move forward and make sure that there's space for everybody in the public realm.
Yeah, I definitely see that. Walking in Oakland almost every day, I almost get hit by a scooter on the sidewalk, and so there is this real-time fear of getting hit by a new mobility device. I think from an equity perspective, a lot of folks that are at risk of displacement or gentrification really see tech as leading the charge, and they already associate inequity with the tech industry. And so some of the fear that we've gotten in the community is that this is something that is not for us. It wasn't planned with us or with our needs in mind. therefore we don't want it or we will protest it. So a lot of the backlash I see in communities is because community hasn't been part of the process for these vehicles being planned into our cities.
Similar to what Kara was saying, we've been kind of inculcated with this idea that freedom is having a car, and we see that in the way our streets are planned, we see that in a way just in media, and I'd say that's not true. In my mind, freedom is about choice, and we are full-heartedly committed to enhancing and improving, maximizing transportation choices for all people. So whether that's biking, walking, transit, getting a ride, or if you can choose, your car or part of our landscape, or whatever's coming down the road, maybe it's autonomous hoverboards or something like that. I think that is going to be critical, and I think changing that mindset is, again, based on collaboration, working hand in hand with organizations like Transform to root our investments in community priorities and working with cities to align our work with their goals.
I would agree with everything people said, but also people's fears are just as myriad as there are people in this room and more. So I think one factor is just the pace at which this is happening. I've seen bike lash in Santa Monica, and that was happening. The transition to biking was happening at a much more gradual pace. This is happening quickly, and people are trying to wrap their heads around it, myself included, and it involves some growing pains. One thing Bert has done is pledged to, in every city we operate, offer $1 per scooter per day and Save Our Sidewalks pledge to the city or a nonprofit of their choice, with in mind that money would go to infrastructure and multimodal education investment. We're still figuring out in the city to figure out how that money is received, and in Austin there's a nonprofit that takes the money and puts it towards infrastructure and shared streets investments. Because in the long term, what's really going to assuage people's fears is making more space for more people and to get around what is are and safe, and so even the most vulnerable users feel like they have freedom of movement in our streets.
Thank you. So many great questions, so little time. That concludes our panel for today. Please join me in thanking Clarissa, Callie, Jason, Rhea, and Kara for their expert perspective. And if your question was not asked, I invite you to come to the stage because they have generously agreed to stand here and answer your questions until they're done. Thank you.
So thank you again, and thank you, Karen, for moderating that panel. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, and this is a bit of a shameless plug, that is, we're talking about moving into this new mobility space and how we anticipate doing that. What does the advocacy need to look like? What do the streets need to look like? And the role of the Bike Coalition, as mentioned earlier, one of is to mobilize you all to advocate for this vision that gets people out of cars, gets people on bikes, and other ways. I mentioned the city of Cupertino and the win that they had last night. That's wonderful, and it was a result of a lot of great advocacy from on-the-ground folks there. There is a community meeting in San Jose tomorrow night, 7 p.m., I believe, at the Allen Rock Library, because on McKee, we're talking about taking away some lanes, taking away some space, and there's been a bit of pushback from people who like their cars. And so please feel free to go to that meeting at the Allen Rock Library. And for the City of San Jose folks in the room, raise your hand so if people have questions, they can go and ask you. Thank you, and we will see you at the next session and then reconvene here for lunch at 12:15.